Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is season 1, episode 14. There's 3 stories in this episode, and those are Still Life, The Little People of Killany Woods, and The Misfortune Cookie. So, spoilers for the episode. This is a Patreon-sponsored review, so thank you very much to Cindy for picking this show. This was a weird episode. Just purely because of the 3 stories that are here all kind of fall into like a category in a way. They've got different tones, they're all about very different subjects, but each one of them kind of feels like they're all relying on a culture of some kind. So the first story is about natives, a native tribe in the Amazon, and kind of spooky things that happen because of them. The second story is in Ireland, and it's about possible leprechauns. And then the third story is about fortune cookies from a Chinese restaurant that are like, you know, actual prophecies that are actually going to come true. And it's not that all of them are necessarily doing anything offensive, but it just felt really weird to have 3 stories back to back where each one of them is about, oh, the mysterious nature of this foreign culture. Like all 3 of them in some way or another fall into that category in some way. So it just, that was a weird thing. I didn't notice it too much in the middle story, I guess just because leprechauns inherently just feel a bit more silly for whatever reason, and it's got more of a playful tone. But once it got to the third story and it was about a fortune cookie from a Chinese restaurant, I was like, oh wow, this is a weird trio of stories to bundle together. It's almost like they did it on purpose for a thematic reason, which would be fine normally, except I don't typically like when you use a foreign culture and try to sort of treat it as this mysterious thing that's got supernatural forces behind it. More often than not, I tend to not like that very much, which probably indicates that I didn't like this episode. And I actually sadly think that there's some good ideas in this episode, but ultimately none of the stories ever amount to enough for me to say that I really enjoyed them. Like I had an equal share of problems and likes with each one, I think. The middle stories, maybe the one, like I feel like the middle story is kind of the weakest in terms of like actual story. But the tone was the best of the 3. The tone that it had for what it was doing was more appropriate, I felt. But ultimately, it still didn't, I don't know, amount to much for me. So, real mixed bag of an episode. There's nothing here that I would really praise outright. But anyway, let's get into them. So, the first story is Still Life, and this is about a photographer who collects old cameras and stuff like that, and finds a really old camera, one of the first ever cameras to use film, in a trunk that he bought used. It turns out that there's photographs that are undeveloped inside it, and it turns out that they come from an expedition to the Amazon from like 1913 or thereabouts. And there's all these photographs of this expedition, of the explorers interacting with the natives and all that stuff. And it all feels fine enough, right? I mean, there's a couple of character things that are set up here, some of which I didn't even really feel like they went anywhere. Like the whole opening of this story is that he was meant to be out buying a new bed for him and his wife, and the wife is slightly annoyed that he came back with a trunk full of junk instead. But it's kind of played for like, oh, he's quirky, and they just kind of end up being a lovey-dovey happy couple for the rest of the episode. Like, I thought at the very least this idea that he's not taking responsibility and like skirting on what he's supposed to be doing was going to be like a character thing that was going to be important. Instead, it never really mattered all that much. Really, all this episode, or this story, boils down to is that when he takes the photographs to an old man who was like around in this time, right? It turns out to have been on the expedition as a kid. He was there when he was like a young teenager. But when he takes these photos to this man and says, hey, I've got photos from this expedition, the old man says, no, that's not possible. That's not possible. They didn't allow us. Like, someone drew what was happening and they scrubbed it out and got very upset, and it became very clear that they were very adamant of like not having images of them. They're very superstitious. You know, it goes on a little monologue about it. And he's like, no, I've got photographs here. I've got them here. And he hands him the photographs, and the old man says, yeah, I recognize these places. This is where we went. But then it's revealed that in the time since the photographer was initially looking at the photos when he developed them, that all of the other people, all the natives in the photographs have all disappeared. And there was a little tease before this scene that the wife heard something in the house. So it kind of turns into this horror story where there's like 7 or 8 like tribal natives from the Amazon sneaking around their house, and they've kidnapped the wife. In fact, one of the most unbelievable things of the whole episode is that this character, the photographer, very quickly, as soon as the old man says, where have the natives went? The photographer just goes, oh no, my wife. And he like rides off on his bike to go and like try and save her. I thought that was a bit of a leap on his part. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's really weird that the photographs that had people in them suddenly don't have any people in them. But to jump to they're alive and they're a danger to my wife, even though that is what's happening, that is what's going on, it's like the character read the script. Because I don't know how we jumped to that conclusion. But anyway, I like this part of it though, I don't like. The actual sneaking through the house and trying to find his wife, and then them try to get back out, and it turns out that the way to fight back against these people is to take a photograph of them, and that sort of captures them back into a camera. It's a little fatal frame kind of mechanic. And I thought, oh, that's actually a fun concept for an episode. Is the idea that people have come alive from photographs and that they can be recaptured with a camera. And that's how they're surviving, and we get like a fun little sequence where they try to get out of the house, and one by one they take photographs of everyone. But it should have been longer. It should have been more of the meat of the episode, as this kind of like horror movie set piece of trying to get out of the house. And I do wish they didn't go down the whole like, this foreign culture has like ancient traditions and they're supernatural and whatever. That part I really could do without. But the actual mechanic of coming out of the photographs and then the camera being the weapon to use against them is actually kind of a neat idea, and something that I think they could have built on and refocused a little bit. I could see it being a pretty fun story. As it is, it's kind of frustrating because we spend so much time getting to know the main 2 characters, the husband and wife, and to be honest, they're not that interesting. Nothing ever really comes up that makes them stand out. Nothing ever really feels like an arc. Like, maybe if they set up the idea that he was forgetting his wife all the time because he was too obsessed with his like hobby or his photography, and that him going to save her was him, putting her first finally. Like that was like the arc of the story. And it's a short story, obviously. All Twilight Zone stories are relatively short. You don't have time to do a ton of stuff, but like a little thing where it felt like it was paying off a character arc would have been nice. Instead, it just kind of feels like we're just kind of killing time until the main premise kicks in, and then it's this decent sequence of them like trying to get out the house with all these people jumping out at them, and they're very ghost-like in the sense that they're all hiding. Like, and this is like 8 people, and they're all somehow hiding perfectly. Like, he's walking around that house for a while before they all start jumping out at him. But yeah, so mixed bag. Some good ideas for like sequences and like a mechanic of which to build a suspenseful plot around, and kind of a cool idea of like something coming out of the photographs. In fact, at the end of the story, the narrator comes in and says something like, in times gone by, like superstitious people would put signs warning of like, hey, don't go here because of this, or not even if it's superstitious, like don't go here because there's lions here or something. But this idea that there's these supernatural things that we should have signposts for, but we don't, so we'll stumble into them unknowingly. And I guess that's the other thing about how like boring and nothing like the main 2 characters are, is that it felt like to me it was missing like it kind of being his fault, like he made a mistake and it was his responsibility that these people were alive or these ghosts were alive and coming for his wife and coming for him. But to be honest, he never really does anything wrong. Like, he bought the stuff used legitimately. He found the camera, and like, how was he supposed to know that he wasn't to develop the film? Like, why wouldn't he do that? Like, anyone would be curious. There's absolutely he doesn't do anything wrong, even in a little small way, that feels like he's learning a lesson as a comeuppance, or because he made a mistake and he has to be taught a lesson. It never feels that way. It just kind of feels like he didn't do anything wrong. Him and his wife seem to have a pretty happy relationship, where they're always kissing, they're always being nice to each other. Even when there's a little thing that seems like a tiff, they quickly laugh it off and everything's fine. So there's never any real like stakes to the relationship, or like them feeling like they deserve a little scare that they have going through this little thing, because they don't. So it left me feeling quite lukewarm, all things considered, even though the central idea of the camera and the photographs is a fun mechanic. So yeah, sort of thing, maybe a remake of the story one day could be cool. So the second story, and they're all pretty even this episode, much like last time. I noted that last time it was kind of the first time it felt like each of the three stories were pretty close in runtime, as opposed to having one really short story. That's two in a row now where they've all been fairly even. I'm sure they're not exactly the same if I actually timed them, but none of them stuck out as being particularly short. So the second story is in Ireland, and it is basically this one guy is convinced that he's seen the little people in the trees, and no one else wants to hear about it. And they're all going through hardships. And one guy in particular, who ends up being kind of the main character, gets angry and says he's sick of hearing him telling stories and he wants to beat him up or whatever. And the bartender just kind of throws the guy out, the guy that was telling the stories, before anything kicks off. But that's like where things start. But the story of the episode is that then this guy who says he saw the little people, implying leprechauns, he goes around like paying people in these gold triangles, and he's getting ready to leave with the little people. And there's a big twist in this episode, actually. But the story follows the guy get angry at him, going around town and questioning the people that he's paid, and demanding to know, wait, is he left? Has he moved on? Like, why was he buying stuff here? What's he doing? And then eventually confronting the guy who's going to leave, and then the reveal that the little people are small people. We have little people actors in green overalls, but they're not leprechauns, they're actually aliens, and the big toadstool's just a UFO. And the idea being that this Irishman's going to go with them, and their planet will be more Irishified because of this guy. So that's the summary in a nutshell. What do I make of this? Like, I will say, the reveal at the end did perk me up, because I was kind of bored up until that point. I appreciate that it's got more of a cheeky tone, which I think helps it and makes it feel less exploitative, I would say, in terms of using this. And maybe it's just because Ireland as a culture is like so like passed on to America anyway. There's so many Irish Americans that, I mean, it doesn't really feel like anything is being abused in that sense. But yeah, it's a weird little story with a funny twist. Is it funny enough to make it all worthwhile? I don't know. I will say that not all of the accents were particularly great. I think you can tell that not all of the actors in this episode are actually Irish actors. So that's also something to consider. But I can't deny that the ending was kind of like a batshit thing. You know, it's basically like, hey, you expect the bully who's demanding to be paid back for any money he's ever lent the guy who's going to be leaving, and he sort of takes the gold from him by force, and it magically turns back into like just like regular metal later on. So he didn't even get the money he wanted. But obviously we're building up to him seeing whatever the other guy saw. It's building up to the skeptic seeing the leprechauns and having his mind blown. But they subvert it a little bit by it not being leprechauns, technically. I mean, they're alien leprechauns from their alien leprechaun planet. I don't know. I think this one feels a little bit shallow, I guess, because it's all fundamentally down to one little trick twist at the end. And I don't know if there's much more weight beyond that. Maybe there is, and I'm just missing it for whatever reason. But that's all I got from it, was that, hey, we've got a funny twist, and we're going to build up to said funny twist. Which is not to say that there's not some other enjoyable elements. I think the actors, well, their accents are very hit and miss. It does feel like they're having fun doing more sort of comical, over-the-top performances. You know, they're not trying to take this seriously. They feel a bit more pantomime-esque in the way that they overact, or Like, the guy who's leaving is kind of scrawny and has a bit of a higher pitched voice, and he feels like the sort of character you'd get in like a, like in like a Christmas Carol. He wouldn't be Scrooge. I'm not saying he reminds me of Scrooge, but he reminds me of like a side character in a Christmas Carol or something like that. He's got that kind of vibe to him. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's got an amusing ending. That's about the best I could say. Well, that and the tone feels appropriate, right? As much as I don't know if like the actual events of the story up until the ending felt like I was getting a full meal of a story, at the very least tonally it was kind of hitting the right tone for what the twist was going to be at the end, which was a silly like, hey, look at this, isn't this funny, they're aliens instead. So I don't know, take of that what you will. The third story, which is The Misfortune Cookie, which has got an actor in it I actually recognise. I want to say that he played Monica and Ross's dad on Friends. I think that's where I know his face from. Elliot Gould is the actor. He plays a food critic who is kind of a mean bastard and just loves tearing apart restaurants in his reviews at the newspaper. He's got like a little thing where he collects matchbooks from the various restaurants that he crucifies in the paper, and he's got like a little cemetery like set up on his desk with all the matchbooks as the tombstones, because a lot of the shops and restaurants apparently closed because of his negative reviews. And he's so petty and just villainous that when the food critic on the TV program that's playing in the background starts praising a restaurant, he immediately starts typing a negative review for the restaurant, even though he's not been there to eat the food yet. Like, he wants to take it down because someone else is there to say this might be the best Chinese food in the city. So they really set up a villainous character. I guess, like, this is the weird thing about this episode as a whole, is that each of the three stories each do one thing well. The first story has the good concept with the camera and the photographs. The second story has the right tone and kind of the fun ending. The third story has the best character building of any of the episodes. They set this guy up, and you understand who he is. You want to see him be taken down a peg. So in that respect, they all have something that really works about them, even though I think as a whole, none of them are completely satisfying. So he goes to this restaurant, and he doesn't even eat any of the food. He just asks for the check without even touching a bite. Maybe he's nibbled on it a little bit. And the owner comes up and says, "Oh, is there anything wrong?" And he's like, "No, I'll just have the check." And the owner says, "Well, I'm not going to make you pay, because if you've not eaten any of the food, then I don't feel like I've fulfilled my side of this. I take pride in this. So I will just give you a fortune cookie and hopefully make amends for how we failed you." Like, he's a very nice man. He tries to sort of treat this like he's failed a customer. And the main character is just this asshole who's very smug the whole time. And he opens the fortune cookie, and it says that there's a great reward just around the corner. And he rolls his eyes, whatever. But sure enough, he gets out of the restaurant. He walks past the alleyway, and this guy runs into him. Turns out this guy just robbed some diamonds. And the owner of the diamonds, or whoever, and the police are very thankful that he stopped this guy, even if it was an accident. And the guy says, "Hey, I was going to pay these policemen a bonus, but I'm going to give it to you instead." So the fortune cookie was right. He got a reward, and it was right around the corner. Literally right around the corner. So he goes back like the next day and says, "You know what? I'm going to write a new review. I'm going to have some more stuff." But he's really just there for another fortune cookie. He just wants another fortune cookie to see what's going to happen to him. So he barely touches the food again, even though he's quite in a good mood. And when he gets the fortune cookie, it says, "Tomorrow, April arrives, and romance will follow." And he turns into an asshole again because he's like, "It's September. This is stupid. This means nothing. This isn't special. I thought this was special. I thought there was something magical happening here." And yells at the owner that he's going to keep the same negative review. And just, again, he's an asshole. Now, I feel like most people reading this, especially since the fortune cookie says, "and romance will begin," my assumption, even before he said that it was September, was that this was not referring to a month. I assumed this was a woman's name. And sure enough, the next day, he meets a woman in the street who's looking for the building that he works in, so he directs her. They kind of hit it off. He asks her out. She says yes. Oh, and by the way, what's your name? It's April. And he's like, da-die. The fortune cookie was right again. So he goes back with her on a date, and he's just waiting for the fortune cookie. He's not eating anything, but she is eating stuff. And eventually when the fortune cookies come, he opens his, and it says, "You're going to die." And when he gets mad about it, the owner says, "You get the fortune that you deserve." That's all I can say. So he gets pissed. She leaves because she's like embarrassed that he's making a scene and that he's been such an asshole. And he walks out. He starts to feel weird, and he says that he's suddenly very hungry. And when he turns around, it's like he's in a different place where there's like tons of Chinese restaurants all down the alleyway now, lots of neon signs. And he goes into one, and they keep bringing him food, and everything's shot very differently. You can kind of tell that he's in the afterlife now because there's like a mist everywhere. The people who are serving him are just acting very silently, and they've all got the long mustaches and all that. And it's basically this idea that he can never be full now. Like, he wasn't eating before, he wasn't appreciating the food for what it actually was, he was just critiquing things with barely touching them, and now he's got this eternal hunger in the afterlife. And when he opens a fortune cookie at the end, in the afterlife, it just says, "You are dead," and that's him finally realizing that he's dead. And the final shot of the story is his matchbook grave site that he has on his desk, and his own name's on one of the matchbooks. And that's how it ends. So this one's a little bit Tales from the Crypt, because it's very much an asshole getting comeuppance, which is what I associate very much with Tales from the Crypt episodes. So this one's okay. I don't think that, like, I love it. And I think part of it is because the fortune cookie thing just feels a bit, I don't know, it's a bit shrugged to me. I don't think it's an exciting concept. Like I said, the camera with the photographs was a better concept, but the character building in this is better for sure. But I did appreciate some of his reactions to things. I did appreciate that it reached a conclusion that made sense for what was going on. I think the performance from the actor is good. It's villainous without being mustache twirling. At least not too mustache twirling at the very least. You know, when he's talking to April and he's like asking her out on a date and all that, he does sort of, it's not like he's acting like an asshole there either. He is kind of taken aback. He feels like a human being in those scenes. So that's something worth saying. And the ending's solid enough. Like, it's fine. I guess the problem I have with it is just this idea that once he's written the negative review and he's pissed the owner off, we don't know what's happening with the fortune cookie. Like, is the owner intentionally putting these messages into them, and then they're coming true because of that? Because if so, then he's kind of an asshole too, because he literally killed this guy, right? He said, "You're going to die" in the fortune cookie, and then he died. He's a murderer at that point, if that's the case. I'm assuming that's not what's happening though, and it's like magically whatever's going to happen is appearing on the fortune cookie slip, right? You know, it's not that anyone's deciding what goes in there, it's just whatever fate actually is going to happen to him is magically appearing in there. So no one's at fault for anything. But there is a tone, though, where like the owner does feel like you deserve whatever you're about to get. If that's what it says, that's what's happening to you. And it does almost feel, despite as much of a dick as the main character has been, it does feel a little bit like really vengeful on the owner's part. That said, though, he does point out that after his first review goes out, that he's lost business. Like, people who had reserved tables started cancelling, so he was losing money at an accelerated rate because of this guy's reviews, because people listen to him and take his words seriously. So, I mean, he's got a right to be pissed. Like, I'm not saying he doesn't. But I guess it feels like he's taking too much glee in the misfortune of the character, I guess. I want to root for the owner, because the owner is innocent in all this, but he's maybe just enjoying it a bit too much later on in the story when the main guy's getting his comeuppance. Like, I'm all for the main guy getting his comeuppance, but maybe dying and having an eternal hunger maybe feels a little harsh. Maybe the punishment doesn't quite fit the crime, perhaps. I don't know. It feels a little bit imbalanced in that sense for me. So I don't know. It's yeah, I don't know. Obviously, the irony of that he's not even tasting the food, but he's writing the negative reviews anyway. There's a message in there of about appreciating things for what they actually are. But I just didn't find it like completely satisfying in terms of a story. But I do think the character building is good because he's very well established and portrayed as the main character of the story. So yeah, very weird episode where each story had one element that I think they did quite well, but everything else kind of made them not that great overall. But none of them are terrible stories either, like because they all have that one thing. They all have something that makes them kind of work, but not completely work. So it's basically a string of 6 out of 10s as far as stories go. So I can't deny that there's consistency here. They're all consistent in different ways, but they're consistent. So take that for what you will. I don't know. But that's my feelings on this episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. We'll see what next time brings. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can support the content as well over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, where you can get bonus stuff, particularly for the movie channel. If you haven't checked out Mail Fuzz Movies, where the sci-fi movie podcast lives, the horror movie podcast lives over there. If you want long-form discussions, really diving deep into the movies with myself and others, they all live in Mail Fuzz Movies. So go check out those, including the Twilight Zone movie a few months ago, now that I think about it. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.